Hello everyone, in this edition of my biography series I've been doing for however long, I'm feeling really old, but anyways, we will be looking at the life of the man known to history as Slim and Lucky Lindy, better known as Charles A. Lindbergh, one of the greatest aviators the world ever saw. Without further ado, here is my biography on the life of the man we call Charles Lindbergh. Let's begin, shall we? The life of the man we call Charles Lindbergh began on this day, February 4th, 119 years ago, in 1902, at this large house which no longer exists, unfortunately, in the dashing and gorgeous city of Detroit, Michigan. Charles A. Lindbergh was born. Charles Lindbergh was born to a Swedish immigrant father and an American mother. His father will come in the story, and his mother will come in the story later. However, Charles Lindbergh would experience terror and fright early on when he was 3 on August 6, 1905. On this day that I previously mentioned, at only 3 years old, Charles Lindbergh's birthhouse caught on fire. Narrowly, Lindbergh was rescued out of the house. Also, fortunately for him and his whole family, no one was severely injured and no one was killed. Most of the items in the house were also rescued, but the bad news, the entire house collapsed, leaving the Lindbergh family practically homeless. No photos exist of the house before or after the fire. Nonetheless, after losing their home, the Lindbergh family persevered on and traveled to the top vacation spot of Minnesota and thought, how about we stay here for a while? Yeah, Minnesota, why not? Here, without even a mean house to live in, being practically homeless, Charles Lindbergh's father, Charles A. Lindbergh Sr., the dad of the guy we're talking about, Charles Lindbergh's father, was actually elected to the U.S. House of Representatives while basically being a homeless person. That is crazy, alright? If you think this part of his life is crazy, oh, just keep watching. From 1905 to 1906, Charles Lindbergh's second house in a much more scenic place, which was Little Falls, Minnesota, was built in a nice, pretty forest. Here, Lindbergh would spend the majority of his childhood. However, Charles' mother, Evangeline, actually wanted to travel to California because she wanted to visit her dying estranged stepdaughter of all people, because she was dying of tuberculosis. And Charles, at age 14, himself actually drove his mother and dog, Wagoosh, fantastic name by the way, to California. His dad was too busy to go because, he was a U.S. representative. Charles drove in his car with his mother and dog driving the entire way for 40 days. That must have been fun. They arrived in California later on. As Evangeline and the rest of the family expected, her estranged stepdaughter died of tuberculosis, sadly. After staying for the winter in California, because Minnesota isn't always a fun place in the winter, Charles and his mother drove back to Minnesota. Once again, Charles had to drive 40 days at age 14, because age limits while driving weren't really a thing back then. In case you're wondering what the car he looked like was driving, this is the car, which is on display at his house in Minnesota, which is now a museum. From September of 1920 to December of 1921, Lindbergh attended the University of the neighboring state of Wisconsin because he got sick of being a Minnesotan farmer, because it got cold as Russia there every winter. However, Lindbergh turned out to be a pretty poor student, eventually dropping out of the University of Wisconsin due to very, very poor grades. Stay in school, kids, even if it might be annoying. On April 7th, 1922, Lindbergh traveled to the tourist mecca that is Lincoln, Nebraska. 'Cause why not? Actually, he traveled here for the first time flying. He didn't ever go flying in a plane up until his 20s, but he did enjoy his first flight in an aircraft. Seriously, who waits 20 years to go on their first airplane flight, especially with one of the world's most famous aviators? Anyways, later that year in 1922, in the June of that year, Lindbergh fell in the mood for thrill, so he decided to go parachute jumping. However, during his fall from 1,800 feet in the air, his second parachute wouldn't open until maybe a little bit more than a minute from the ground. I wonder what he was thinking at that moment. The dot in this photo, for reference, is him falling to the ground. Look before you leap, they say. Hey, stop it. I take great pride in my puns. Hey. On April 9th, 1923, Charles Lindbergh was like, screw licenses, and he flew his first solo flight. Let me just say he had no license, and he'd practiced only for a few hours before this. Luckily, against the odds, Charles Lindbergh didn't crash his plane, and successfully landed. If you're going to fly a plane, please finish flight school. It'll help you in the end. OCD warning. From March 15th, 1924 to March 14th, 1925, almost a perfect year, Lindbergh served in the U.S. Army as a flying cadet. On March 5th, 1925, during this time, Lindbergh's plane collided with another plane, causing Lindbergh to have to jump out of the plane and parachute down to the earth. This man is plane crazy, people. He graduated from flight school, finally on the day I previously mentioned, March 14th, 1925. He had no flight license this whole time. In September of 1926, Lindbergh planned his first long-distance flight from New York City to Paris. Lindbergh did this route because he heard another man on this exact route trying to become the first person to fly a transatlantic route nonstop, continuously, had disappeared because, you need motivation for things. However, Lindbergh needed a plane. From February to April of 1927, Lindbergh's plane was constructed by a construction company in San Diego. In honor of the men financing his daring route, who probably thought he would die for sure, but still wanted to pay his venture, his plane was named the Spirit of St. Louis, as many of these old patrons lived in St. Louis, Missouri. And the day has arrived. On May 20th, 1927, Charles Lindbergh took off from the Roosevelt Airfield in Long Island and set off for Paris, France. Needless to say, 33 hours, 29 minutes, and 30 seconds later, Lindbergh successfully landed at the Le Bourget Airfield in Paris, becoming the first person to fly solo and nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean, making him an instant celebrity across the world. Having the celebrity life he never expected, Lindbergh actually, from July to October of 1927, traveled in the Spirit of St. Louis across 48 states on the so-called Goodwill Tour to visit fans and people who thought he would surely die. He also made the first flight from Washington, D.C. in the USA to Mexico City, and I'll let you figure out that country. He also, during this time period, earned a Presidential Medal of Honor, courtesy of President Calvin Coolidge. Charles Lindbergh was also named the first-time Man of the Year, because let's just say women always weren't selected for honors like that. However, all this great time ended after marrying his wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, on May 27th, 1929. Anne and Charles would later give birth to their third child, also named Charles Lindbergh III, original name. However, tragedy struck at the family's home in Hopewell, New Jersey on March 1st, 1932. This is when Charles and Anne's son, Charles Lindbergh III, was kidnapped from his crib, brought down a ladder from his window, and was later found to have been murdered near the house. 3 years later, the culprit, Bruno Hauptmann, was arrested and would later be sentenced to death a year later. This undoubtedly made the Lindbergh very, very depressed. Sadly for him, good things wouldn't follow this either. After this tragic loss, Charles Lindbergh became a member of the so-called America First movement during World War II. This movement was dedicated to keeping the U.S. isolated from its allies and be an isolationist country like Japan. Charles Lindbergh gave a speech supporting it in Des Moines, Iowa, calling the three culprits of the U.S. threatening their isolation: the Roosevelt administration, the British, and the Jewish was a reason to isolate. So many people called him anti-Semitic. He got compared to being a Nazi, and Lindbergh's reputation got hit hard. However, he would still remain fairly popular. However, his popularity wasn't about to take flight in the way it did. Oh, come on, stop it. Have a dang sense of humor, you people. Stop. In 1954, Lindbergh was awarded the Guggenheim Medal by President Dwight D. Eisenhower, whose popularity was through the roof. Eisenhower then directly appointed Lindbergh to a brigadier general in the Air Force, which was a great honor for Lindbergh, and he graciously accepted this offer. Lindbergh, over the next few years in the Air Force, would make his wife furious after she discovered that he had been cheating on her and had affairs with 3 other women, yet she didn't divorce him. Talk about clemency and a lot of devotion. I guess that he had a bad altitude. What, did that joke not land? Ha, I got 2. Oh, come on, stop it. It's called audience retention, people. You're the one who clicked on the video. Stop. Through the rest of his life, about 20 years, Lindbergh would retire from flying and even come to hate airplanes a little bit, thinking they were too polluting. Lindbergh was even quoted for saying, quote, "If I had to choose, I'd rather have birds than airplanes," end quote. Lindbergh would become a staunch conservation supporter. In 1968, Lindbergh moved to the very, very, very remote and small town of Kipahulu on the island of Maui in Hawaii, where he would spend the majority of the rest of his life. However, in the years following, Lindbergh was sadly diagnosed with terminal lymphatic cancer in the 1970s with no avoidance, and he was told he would die before the decade was over. His doctors were correct. He later told his doctors, quote, "I would rather spend 2 more days on Maui than 30 days in this New York City hospital." Lindbergh would die at his remote house in Maui on August 26, 1974, of the cancer I mentioned. He was buried in Hawaii, his favorite place in the world. I was also at his grave a few years ago, so there's that. Anyways, as for his favorite plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, I was one time at the Smithsonian Museum of Air and Space, and I asked an employee randomly what happened to it, and they said it's directly over my head. And then I looked up and saw it in all of its glory collecting dust in the rafters. It was refurbished a few years later, and it was pretty dang dusty. And with that was my biography of Charles A. Lindbergh. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I know that his life was a little bit crazy and bonkers at points, but that's life. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the video and the puns in it, although some of you might think that the puns didn't quite take off. Oh, stop it. Come on. Stop. You people. I have had it with you people. Some of you people without a sense of humor are a disgrace. Anyways, as for what is coming up next, it will be another country history video. You all know this country. You all probably love it. Probably some way too much. I don't need to introduce you to this country at all. We've all had exposure to its culture, and a lot of us have something to say about this country. Japan is coming up next on February 11th. It's National Day. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm sorry that will be a week away, but I need a lot of time for Japan because it and the national anthem as well as the history are really hard to make a video on in maybe 15 minutes summarizing everything. So yeah, stay tuned for that. It will be coming out in a week from today on February 11th. Thank you all so much for watching.